Jim Simons is a mathematician, but more than that, he's one of the greatest moneymakers in the history of finance, largely because of his status as a mathematician. No other investor in modern financial history can come close to his ability to game the market and make enormous wealth. A pioneer in algorithms and their application, Jim Simons was able to translate his mathematical knowledge to earn a net worth of over $23 billion. But how did he accomplish this? And what is his legacy? This is the story of Jim Simons, the man who cracked Wall Street. Beginnings. James Harris Simons was born in 1938, the son of a middle-class American Jewish family in Brookline, Massachusetts. Even at an early age, young Jim was extremely enthusiastic about mathematics. In fact, he was already able to solve complex problems at the incredibly young age of just 3 years old. This is typical of many children who go on to become mathematicians. For them, the numbers just sort of speak to them. His obvious talent for numbers was even more apparent as he would spend his time dividing numbers by 2, all the way down from 1024. For those who understand computing, 1024 is the maximum number of computer memory addresses that can be referenced with 10 binary switches. But more than that, it's also part of a classic math problem that dates back to even ancient Greece. The premise is simple in this logic puzzle. If you are always required to travel half of the remaining distance before reaching your destination, you will literally never reach it. A small child to be considering mathematics on this level was no small accomplishment, and the family knew all the way through his scholastic career that they had an unusual, maybe even gifted child. When Simons finished high school, the family doctor advised him to go into medicine as a career, figuring that a smart Jewish kid like Jim would do extremely well in the field. However, like so many others who end up fabulously wealthy, Simons did not listen to the advice of the doctor and instead followed his interest and headed to MIT, where he would study mathematics. Simons was a good student, but he found that he was not successful at first at MIT, failing several tests. It was only after a summer where he spent time coming to grips with the complex series he was dealing with in school, and after that he began to flourish. He found it fascinating how the formulae from the various regions of mathematics could seemingly join with others to solve other, bigger problems. He took inspiration from his professors, whom he saw engaging in discussion about mathematical problems, and he believed he had discovered the life he wanted, a life of numbers, the Cold War codecracker. Following his successful run at MIT, Simons would attend Berkeley and earn his PhD 2 years later and was able to gain a job at Harvard University teaching. As a professor, he was well liked by the students who found his style of teaching informal, humble, but passionate, to be a nice alternative to the stodgier types who wore suits all the time. Simons rarely even wore socks. However, it wasn't long, maybe a couple of years, before Simons was getting bored with the predictable mundanity of the teaching life. He found his life was lacking in any challenges and that he wouldn't last long if he were as dispassionate as he was becoming. However, in 1964, another opportunity came his way from the research group, Institute for Defense Analysis, or IDA, who were hard at work for the United States of America during the period known as the Cold War. IDA would hire the best mathematicians they could find and crack Soviet military and spy codes, but they had not had much success for around a decade. They needed new ideas from young thinkers, figured that those with no coding experience to steer their thinking would be helpful, and that's why they found Simons. As for Simons, it was the challenge he was looking for, as he was able to learn how to develop models in math for interpreting patterns in apparently random data. He worked hard and developed the Institute's first ultra-fast code-breaking algorithm. And when the CIA needed help with coded messages that deviated from the norm, this algorithm was able to decrypt the Soviet messaging system. However, with that accomplishment also complete, Simons began once again to grow bored, taking on the financial world. As he was working at IDA, Simons began to take an interest in global finance. The way he saw it, the contemporary methods of investment that were being used at the time were missing out on several ways that the market could be exploited, and approached the market as an intellectual system of mathematics. He ignored the news, focusing only on the numbers to develop a model of his own. His consideration was that the market was made up of 8 different states, and focused on how price, volume, and volatility could be measured and separated into these states. In short, Simons had just taken his first steps into what is now known as quantitative analysis and was about to become a pioneer in the world of investment. Qualitative analysis, as well as predictive theory, are things that are still used today, not only in finance but in artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, he was still working at IDA. and he continued to work at the institute until he was fired. This was because he had taken an oppositional stance to the Vietnam War, like so many had at the time. With disappointment in his heart, Simons decided to go back to teaching, but this time at Stony Brook University. However, with Wall Street not far away, Simons would soon enter the hedge fund game. First fund. Simons had always been an ambitious man, but one thing he wanted more than anything was to become rich. Not just a little rich either, but very rich. He taught at Stony Brook for 10 years, but he was not satisfied with life as a teacher, just that he had previously hadn't been, and all the while he had been developing theories and models for the global stock market. It was clear which direction was the right one for him, and in 1978, at the age of 40, Simons started a hedge fund called Monometrics. His plan was to use his still incredible ability with mathematics to discern patterns in the markets, but he couldn't do it alone. He contacted an old friend of his from the institute, Leonard Baum, and the two became partners in the endeavor. It would be the Baum-Welch algorithm that would make the linchpin of Simons' early success in hedge funds. This algorithm would make predictions based on data from the past to calculate the probabilities and outcomes. This algorithm could be applied to anything, like even human behavior. If it were applied to someone's personal schedule, it would be able to predict the likelihood of a person waking up at a certain time or wearing a certain item of clothing, but that's a simple example. This kind of algorithm is all over the world now, in Google's search engine and in speech recognition technology like Siri. Simons and Baum decided to use the algorithm in the currency market initially, and immediately began to earn profits. When the algorithm said a currency was about to go up, they would buy a lot of it and watch as it did. They didn't need to know why, just a likelihood that it was true. As a result of this style of investment, Monometrics made tens of millions of dollars in just a couple of years. However, not all successes last, and some big losses were coming soon. Failures and losses. With the growth of Monometrics, Simons decided to add to the team surrounding him and Baum with other mathematicians. He also started a second hedge fund known as Limroy, with some other math experts that he knew. But the Monometrics algorithm was running into problems, as they were able to predict when an asset would be about to rise, but they didn't sell when it was high. One example of this was when the price of gold soared to over $800 an ounce, and then crashed again to just $500. The algorithm was too slow to sell it, and so the firm lost millions. This became a big problem, with Monometrics losing millions of dollars a day due to the algorithm being slow. It happened again and again, and the company was almost completely collapsing under the weight of the losses. However, Simons would then go on to create one of his most famous creations that would change modern finance forever. The Renaissance begins. Despite incurring heavy losses with Monometrics, Simons knew smart and wealthy investors and was able to get them to back his new fund. Simons knew that if he were going to succeed again, though, he would need more than money. He would need a far more sophisticated algorithm, and by this time it was the early 1980s, so computers were just beginning to find homes in offices and uses in various sectors. Despite their youth, Simons realized computers had the potential to manage data far more readily than most human brains could ever hope to. Computers lack emotions, so while Simons saw other investors using their instincts and reading the news, he renamed Monometrics to Renaissance Technologies. This is a name that would go down in the annals of financial history as changing everything, forever. He got to work collecting all kinds of data from financial history, including books from the World Bank and records of transactions of currencies, even going as far back as to before the Second World War. He fed all of his data into his computer so that it would be able to analyze market movements throughout the eras and apply what it had learned to the present, but it proved to be mostly irrelevant. Undeterred, Simons had Renaissance buy expensive computers that could quickly analyze more pertinent data from the present and give him access to live market prices in a way that was much faster than Wall Street was able to display. Recruiting James Axe and using his improved version of the old Monometrics algorithm, predictive analysis began on the live market. The algorithm had been significantly refined in order to allow for prediction of the extremely volatile 1980s market, and Renaissance's returns began to improve. Adapt, adopt, and improve. As the algorithm improved, more powerful computers were released, which would allow Renaissance to monitor more and more data. Axe and Simons bonded quickly and decided to open a new hedge fund under Renaissance Technologies alongside the Limroy Fund. This became known as the Medallion Fund, one of the most famous funds in financial history. In no time at all, Medallion was the most profitable portfolio that Renaissance had, and Simons and Axe worked hard to ensure that they always had the best and brightest minds available to work on the algorithm. They found and recruited a computer scientist and artificial intelligence developer called Robert Mercer, and found that he was exactly who they needed. Mercer had been a key engineer at IBM, and his successes had allowed IBM to make giant leaps in fields such as speech recognition technology. He was the man for the job. Mercer's forte was his ability to spot glitches in the system and allow for Renaissance to improve on it. This brought the company incredible success as the years rolled on and into the 90s. Unlikely as it seems to be possible, Renaissance had an average annual return of 60% during the 90s and 0 losses. However, a couple of decades later, and after Simons had decided to retire in 2010, a key difference between Simons and Mercer would cause their relationship to break. Falling out over politics. Jim Simons is very left-wing politically. He was a supporter of the Democratic Party, and as such, he found it increasingly intolerable that Robert Mercer was more of a conservative. Mercer supported the Republican Party of free speech and eventually making America great again. As the two men had become incredibly wealthy through their work together, they had been able to get more involved in politics. Simons had supported Hillary Clinton's run for president in 2016, one that is now mired in investigations of spying on the opponent Donald Trump, who eventually did become president. The times were changing. The Democrats were behaving increasingly anti-American, and Mercer, as more of a right-leaner, chose to back Trump financially. Of course, his earnings came from Renaissance, and this made Simons furious. At the time, a wave of anti-Trump sentiment was being launched across America from big tech, the news media, and the Democrats. And when it was discovered that Mercer had supported Trump, he was forced to step down as co-CEO of Renaissance. Once again, politics had got involved in the business world. Jim Simons' legacy. Jim Simons is probably the most successful investor ever. His profits at Renaissance are legendary, as the firm made $105 billion in just 30 years, between 1988 and 2018. He was and is responsible for the so-called quant revolution, which is used in just about every sector of the world, from sport to the military. However, he has also given over $2 billion to philanthropic causes. He co-founded the Simons Foundation with his wife Marilyn in 1994, supporting education and health. He founded Math for America in 2004, pledging a total of $50 million to the cause, and he established the Flatiron Institute in 2016 to house 5 groups of computational scientists. At the age of 83, Simons sits atop the world of mathematics, but also the world of finance, being the only man who ever cracked Wall Street and changed the world.